according to Luke, the 2nd chapter. Now Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up according to the custom. And when the feast was ended, as they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents didn't know it. But supposing him to be in the group, they went a day's journey. But then they began to search for him among the relatives and acquaintances. And when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem, searching for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. And when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress." And he said to them, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" And they did not understand the saying that he spoke to them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. The word of the Lord. I can remember, we can all remember those times where we've gotten lost. I remember getting lost in rural Virginia. I was visiting with a friend. I had not paid attention to the directions and I missed the turn. So there I was, way off track, but I eventually pulled out the map and got back onto the roads I needed to go and created a new route. Obviously, everything turned out okay in the end. I'm here. Yet, we've all had those experiences where we've missed the signpost and then we've become befuddled and maybe a little bit angry and antsy. And of course, it's not in driving that this happens alone either. Unless we think too highly of ourselves, it's not just the so-called moral monsters who wake up one day after lives of compromise to find out that they are up to their eyeballs in sin. All of us have days where we realize we've gone down a path where we shouldn't have, and the best thing to do is just to retrace our steps back to where everything was good. You know, when we talk about these things, a lot of times we do get sidetracked by the moral monsters. It's an us versus them. You know, the old phrase, "At least I'm not Hitler," as if that's such a wonderful bar that we should all be measuring ourselves against. No, it's noteworthy that the Bible is filled with this. The best saints, the most noteworthy people of history can take their eyes off of God. Abraham tried to enact the covenant on his own steam. Moses testily vents his frustration at the people of Israel by batting a rod against a rock. Not what God commanded him. And Elijah throws himself a nice little pity party there on the mountain after achieving a great spiritual battle any of us would be proud of. Even the best of us ignore the signposts of the gospel as we attempt to work out our own vision on our own steam. Mary and Joseph, too, attempt to perform the task of raising the Messiah by themselves, while ignoring the glaring signposts that this boy might not be theirs alone, and his mission may be larger than their particular vision. This is a difficult text because in normal circumstances, most of us would say, well, the kid gets lost and stays behind and causes the parents to worry. You take him out of the temple and you have a few choice words with him. But then again, we did celebrate something just yesterday actually, and the day before that. We tend to forget just who this child is. And then we start to wonder that maybe Mary and Joseph have too limited a view of just what Jesus is trying to accomplish. The story has three movements: losing the Messiah, finding the Son, and guarding the meaning. David Garland points out that the law stipulated that Hebrew males must go up to the temple at least 3 times a year: the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of the Harvest, and at the Feast of the Ingathering. This is, for those of you who like to look this stuff up, attested in Exodus 23:14-17, 34:23, and Deuteronomy 16:16. Getting amens from back there. Not now, man. There'll be time for amens. But the poorer persons could not always make these feasts, though. And so the Feast of Unleavened Bread was the best choice. It's worth noting that at 12 years old, and Jesus being the firstborn, he would now be considered old enough and indeed obligated to fulfill the religious duties. What's interesting is that Joseph does complete the religious duties, albeit the bare minimum. He stays there for only a couple of days, and then he and the family join the kin as they head back home. To Mary and Joseph, these rituals are something they do because everyone does them. But it is the everyday things, visiting with family or getting back to work in time, that they consider real life. The obligations that they owe to God have become just a ritual that they must do instead of a joy that they get to do. They're so distracted with their real life that Jesus doesn't even enter into their minds, quite literally. Of course, extended families often travel together for protection and camaraderie in this time. And pastors and scholars are quick to point out that leaving Jesus behind would not even be like leaving Kevin McAllister behind at home alone. On the other hand, isn't this much like our own lives? We become so fixated on issues that, though they are important and worthwhile, pale in comparison to walking with Jesus. We too may take comfort in narratives that, well, everybody leaves Jesus behind at the church when we get caught up in the moment. Something about that just rings hollow. To their credit, Mary and Joseph decide that it would be best to circle back and pick up the Messiah. They searched for him amongst the entourage first, and then they searched for him in the city. And oddly enough, they were unable to locate him. It's only when they returned to the temple that they found him. It's worth pausing again to just imagine the absurdity that's recorded here. Had they forgotten who this child was? How heavenly messengers visited them, laying out the identity of just who this boy was going to be? How strangers showed up at their doorstep, offering gifts and praise? How the heavens were ripped wide open as the glory of God drowned out the mundane backwater of this first century Judean countryside? Had they forgotten all that? More to the point, have we? Do we look for God amongst our family and friends? Do we expect to find him in the marketplace, the entertainment districts, the halls of power? Should we not go to the places that we know He explicitly said He will be? The places where He promised to dwell, in the church, in the Word, in the sacraments. Well, Mary and Joseph's response is just the same as our own, it turns out. It's the same as our own when we find Jesus too. Why have you worked us over? We've been out of our minds with worry looking for you. Jesus' response to His parents is the same response that He still makes to people today. Why were you searching? You knew where to find me. I imagine it is then that Mary and Joseph awake from their fog. They look around the temple to see the wise and the learned reclining around Him. This boy, their God, returned to the temple after, so many years. Listening to them, laying questions before them, just being present there in the temple. It was probably then that the angelic dreams came back to their minds, the visitations of the stargazers and shepherds, the promises that God had made to them. Had they really forgotten it all? Laid it aside like a much coveted Christmas gift that, after so many years, becomes overlooked and half forgotten, placed upon a shelf to be pulled down every so often in the year. They still didn't fully understand His message, though, or His meaning. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter about how strong their belief was. He still went with them. He still stepped out of the temple and came back to their home in Nazareth. We are told that Jesus submitted. That word is hupatasso. Luke is the only one of the gospel writers to ever use this word. And the other two times are when he's talking about how the spirits, the evil of this world, have submitted to Christ's power. But it's in the second chapter of the book of Hebrews that we see just what Jesus is all about with this word. There, God lays out all of creation. And He shows that it submits to human beings. But because of our loss of our relationship with God, we can't maintain this position. And in answer to this, God sends Christ to submit to our punishment so that we may have a share in His righteousness. Our Lucan passage ends with a curious phrase that His mother treasured up all these things in her heart. He meter atu dietere panta ta ramata en te cardia ates. The word treasured here, dietere, means guarded or to keep. It is the notion of someone who puts something in that most treasured part of their lives, or how soldiers will guard and keep and protect treasures, protect cities. This memory of Jesus is so valuable to her that she puts it under lock and key. It is at the center of her being. She's tying into the much older Hebrew understanding of shamar. In Genesis 2:15, for instance, humans are to care for and to guard shamar, creation. Genesis 17:9, Abraham is to shamar the covenants. In Numbers 153 and 3:7-8, the people are to shamar the Ark of the Covenant. But here's something new is happening with that guarding, with that shamar. It's new for Mary as Mary guards and treasures the good news that God is dwelling amongst us and placing Himself below us, submitting for a time so that we can dwell beside Him. That word still resonates with us today. No more do we have to guard over laws and rituals and dead things and try and work out our salvation, but now we guard the gospel message. We watch over it, for it watches over us. The story ends by telling us that Jesus grew, and he waited until he would fulfill his mission. He grew in stature. His reputation grew. But it would take time, just as it took time before his birth, it would take time before he would fulfill his mission. The Bible is so familiar to us that sometimes we lose track of what it's trying to say. It's so easy to get lost in the quick readings of texts. And those quick readings of the text might lead us to believe that it is Jesus who was the one who got lost. Yet there are many ways to get lost in life. And oftentimes the people who are lost have convinced themselves it's actually the other person. Sometimes it's missing an exit in an unfamiliar state. Other times it's believing our problems really aren't getting in the way of our lives. Yet our gospel lesson shows that a troubling way of getting lost is to be so fixated on the here and the now and the concerns of this world that we forget our calling and we leave Christ behind at the temple, or in our case at the church. Daily we seem to lose the Messiah in big ways and in small ways. But it's reassuring that we do not need to find Jesus, for he is always where he promised that he would be. He promises to be in word and in sacrament. And with this reassurance, we can treasure and we can guard the gospel. That gospel promise that still resides in the midst of our own lives. It's easy for us to talk about this here on church on Sunday mornings. And while we may understand where we have left Christ behind and then go to return to pick him up once again so that he can travel with us on our way to our homes. Many of our neighbors seem to wonder just where Christ is. They have a nasty thought that Christ is someone that you have to find. That Christ is someone who enjoys hiding from us. But just as Jesus met the needs of the scribes in the temple who did not know God's mission, we now proclaim Christ's mission to the world. Just as the scribes were drawn to the questions and the answers of the young Christ, our neighbors actually are drawn to lives that have spent time at the feet of Christ. Just as Mary guarded over the life of Christ, we too treasure and guard that gospel message, for it is the most important message we will ever hear. We too should share our ups and our downs, our wrong turns and our unexpected vistas, to let people know that God truly is with us and that he wishes to make his home with us as well. Amen.